Om Namo Narayanaya. Welcome back. We are on chapter 2 of Canto 4 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Let's dive right in. This is called Daksa Curses Lord Shiva. Vidura inquired, why was Daksa, who was so affectionate towards his daughter, envious of Lord Shiva, who was the best among the gentle? Why did he neglect his daughter, Sati? Lord Shiva, the spiritual master of the entire world, is free from enmity, is a peaceful personality, and is always satisfied in himself. He is the greatest among the demigods. How is it possible that Daksha could be inimical towards such an auspicious personality? My dear Maitreya, to part with one's life is very difficult. Would you kindly explain to me how such a son-in-law and father-in-law could quarrel so bitterly that the great goddess Sati could give up her life? The sage Maitreya responded, in a former time, the leaders of the universal creation performed a great sacrifice in which all the great sages, philosophers, demigods, and fire gods assembled with their followers. When Daksha, the leader of the Prajapatis, entered that assembly, his personal bodily luster as bright as the effulgence of the sun, the entire assembly was illuminated, and all the assembled personalities became insignificant in his presence. Influenced by his bodily luster, all the fire gods and other participants in the great assembly, with the exceptions of Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, gave up their own sitting places and stood in respect for Daksha. Daksha was adequately welcomed by the president of the great assembly, Lord Brahma. After offering Lord Brahma respect, Daksha, by the order of Brahma, properly took his seat. Before taking his seat, however, Daksha was very much offended to see Lord Shiva sitting and not showing him respect. At that time, Daksha became greatly angry, and his eyes glowing, he began to speak very strongly against Lord Shiva. All sages, brahmanas, and fire gods present, please hear me with attention, for I speak about the manners of gentle persons. I do not speak out of ignorance or envy. Lord Shiva has spoiled the name and fame of the governors of the universe and has polluted the path of gentle manners, because he is shameless. He does not know how to act. He has already accepted himself as my subordinate by marrying my daughter in the presence of fire and brahmanas. He has married my daughter, who is equal to Gayatri, and has pretended to be just like an honest person. He has eyes like a monkey's, yet he has married my daughter, whose eyes are just like those of a deer cub. Nevertheless, he did not stand up to receive me, nor did he think it fit to welcome me with sweet words. I had no desire to give my daughter to this person, who has broken all rules of civility. Because of not observing the required rules and regulations, he is impure. But I was obligated to hand over my daughter to him, just as one teaches the messages of the Vedas to a Shudra. He lives in filthy places, like crematoriums, and his companions are ghosts and demons. Naked like a madman, sometimes laughing and sometimes crying, he smears crematorium ashes all over his body. Therefore only in name is he Shiva, or auspicious. Actually, he is the most mad and inauspicious creature. Thus, he is very dear to crazy beings in the gross mode of ignorance, and he is their leader. On the request of Lord Brahma, I handed over my chaste daughter to him, although he is devoid of all cleanliness, and his heart is filled with nasty things. Thus Daksha spoke, and seeing Lord Shiva sitting as if against him, washed his hands and mouth, and cursed him in the following words. The demigods are eligible to share in the oblations of sacrifice, but Lord Shiva, who is the lowest of all the demigods, should not have a share. Maitreya continued his narration. My dear Vidura, in spite of the requests of all the members of the sacrificial assembly, Daksha, in great anger, cursed Lord Shiva, and then left, and went back to his home. Upon understanding that Lord Shiva had been cursed, Nandishvara, one of his principal associates, became greatly angry. His eyes became red, and he prepared to curse Daksa and all the Brahmanas present there who had tolerated Daksa's cursing Shiva in harsh words. He spoke. Anyone who has accepted Daksa as the most important personality and neglected Lord Shiva because of envy is less intelligent, and because of visualizing in duality will be bereft of transcendental knowledge. Pretentiously religious householder life, in which one is attracted to material happiness and thus also attracted to the superficial explanation of the Vedas, robs one of all intelligence and attaches one to fruitive activities as all in all. Daksa has accepted the body as all in all. Therefore, since he has forgotten the Vishnu Pada, or Vishnu Gati, and is attached to sex life only, within a short time he will have the face of a goat. Those who have become as dull as matter by cultivating materialistic education and intelligence are necessarily involved in fruitive activities. Such men have purposely insulted Lord Shiva. May they continue in the cycle of repeated birth and death. May those who are envious of Lord Shiva, being attracted by the flowery language of the enchanting Vedic promises, and who have thus become dull, always remain attached to fruitive activities. These Brahmanas take to education, austerity, and vows only for the purpose of maintaining the body. They shall be devoid of discrimination between what to eat and what not to eat. They will acquire money begging from door to door simply for the satisfaction of the body. When all the hereditary Brahmanas were thus cursed by Mandeshvara, the sage Bhargava, as a reaction, condemned the followers of Lord Shiva with this very strong Brahmanical curse. One who takes a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva, or who follows such principles, will certainly become an atheist and be diverted from transcendental scriptural injunctions. Those who vow to worship Lord Shiva are so foolish that they imitate him by keeping long hair on their heads. When initiated in the worship of Lord Shiva, they prefer to live on wine, flesh, and other things. Since you blaspheme the Vedas and the Brahmanas, who are followers of the Vedic principles, it is understood that you have already taken shelter of the doctrine of atheism. The Vedas give the eternal regulative principles for auspicious advancement in human civilization, which have been rigidly followed in the past. The strong evidence of this principle is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is called Janardana, the well-wisher of all living entities. By blaspheming the principles of the Vedas, which are the pure and supreme path of the saintly persons, certainly you followers of Bhutapi Lord Shiva will descend to the standard of atheism without a doubt. The sage Maitreya continued. When such cursing and counter-cursing was going on between Lord Shiva's followers and the parties of Daksa and Bhargava, Lord Shiva became very morose. Not saying anything, he left the arena of the sacrifice, followed by his disciples. Vidyura, all the progenitors of the universal population, thus executed a sacrifice for thousands of years. For sacrifice is the best way to worship the Supreme Lord, Hari, Lord Vishnu. Carriers of bows and arrows, all the demigods who were performing the sacrifice took their bath at the confluence of the Ganges and the Yamuna after completing the yajna performance. Such a bath is called Avabrita Snana, and after thus becoming purified in heart, they departed for their respective abodes. Thus ends chapter 2. So there's an interesting line here, and I want to point out something, because this is something I didn't know for the longest time. So they talk about becoming an atheist. Verse 28, one who takes a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva or who follows such principles will certainly become an atheist. So think about that for a second in Western theological perspective. So if you take a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva, who is a god or a demigod, you will become an atheist. How does that doesn't make any sense. because atheist means someone who does not believe in God. So if you don't believe in God, then you're not going to be taking a vow to a God that doesn't exist. That's because the definition of atheism in India, in the East, in Hinduism, doesn't mean what it does in the West. It has a completely different definition. And this boggled my mind for many, many years, and I never saw it talked about, because I sometimes think that people don't actually realize this. They just read the word and they move on. So atheist, traditionally, it may be different today. It may have taken on the Western definition, but traditionally, in India and in Sanatana Dharma, atheist means one who does not believe in the Vedas. Doesn't mean one who does not believe in God. It was assumed in the past, again, I don't know if it's like this anymore, but it was assumed you did believe in God. The non-existence of God doesn't enter into any theological discussion if you look in Indian history. There is disagreements, obviously, about the form of God, or God's commandments, or words, or whatever, but there really is no debate in Hinduism and the tradition of India, or the religions of India, over the non-existence of God, like we have here in America and in the West. To be an atheist meant you did not recognize the Vedas, perhaps the Upanishads, and maybe other scriptures. Another line says, since you blaspheme the Vedas and the Brahmanas, who were followers of Vedic principles, it is understood that you have already taken shelter of the doctrine of atheism. It's very interesting. So, funny enough, as soon as I read that, now I think of something else. We might actually call the New Age movement, not all of it, but a lot of it, atheist. Because many people believe in Kali or Ganesh or whatever, but they don't believe in the Vedas. They have no interest in them, they don't even know them, they don't believe in any of the scripture, but they believe in the God. So theoretically, according to this definition, New Age believers are atheists. But understand, in this context, atheism has just a very, very definition. And to come at this going, well, atheist doesn't mean you believe in God, absolutely would make this gibberish. You just cannot understand this. And I didn't know that. I kept seeing the word atheist mentioned here and there, often very casually, like, don't be an atheist. So I didn't think anything of it. And in that context, to tell to someone, don't be an atheist, oh yeah, don't stop believing in God, makes total sense. But that's not what was meant by that. Sadly, like I said, if I don't know it, I assume a lot of people also don't know that. I think it's a word that really just doesn't get talked about a lot. And this definition doesn't get known. And so we have these theological conversations that are sometimes a little wonky. Because, truth be told, a Hindu perspective is very different than a Judeo-Christian perspective. It is very different. It makes assumptions. It comes at a different place. It has things it believes that you won't find otherwise. That being said, I'm not going to say that because the West has an atheist theological tradition, quasi-theological, I don't know what we'd call it, non-theological, theological tradition of debate and discussion, Bertrand Russell and folks like that, and the East doesn't, thus that makes this more intellectual, and that potentially from the East they'd say the fact that you don't believe in God doesn't make you smarter, it makes you a fool. The West we would say, well, you don't believe in God, you do believe in God, thus you're using your brain and you're coming to conclusions. You see how these two points of view just really don't mix, they don't get along, they crash. And what happens is, in modern spiritualism and New Age stuff and self-guruing and all this whatever, you have this perspective and then you have this perspective coming together, and people don't realize that when you look on the surface, they're okay and they seem to work together, but when you look underneath, they're just fighting. And you can't look underneath. You have to keep it very surface. And that's something that I've dealt with all my life, is trying to bring this belief and this belief together, and then realizing that they're actually not working together. And so I've been pulling away and wanting one belief system that is solid versus trying to mix two. And that gets into a discussion of universalism, and I'm just not going to go there. I am not a universalist for this reason. They don't always mesh, but we try to ignore that. Anyways, I'm not going to go there. Video is long enough as it is. I'm going to open the floor to you, and you can make further comments or whatever. Keep this conversation going. Anyways, thank you for joining me as we roll into Canto 4 and see what's going on with this. And yeah, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.